dash camera, a cell phone, and a home surveillance camera. The video and audio will be unedited, although some video images may be redacted or blurred to ensure privacy. But we do want to warn viewers, the video contains strong language as well as graphic images, resulting in the loss of Patrick Lyoya's life. We have not seen any of this video yet, and we do not plan to show those images on the air. After the news conference, we will have a link to the city's website where you'll be able to view the footage. Police Chief Eric Winstrom says during the upcoming news conference, he plans to provide additional context to the footage and explain the next steps in the investigative process. He says releasing the video will ensure the integrity of the investigation in the interests of justice and accountability will be protected. This story has gained national attention over the weekend. Hundreds of people marched in downtown Grand Rapids, including Patrick's family, demanding the GRPD release the video immediately.
Well, yesterday, more than 100 protesters rallied and downtown before marching to Grand Rapids City Commission meeting. Many community members spoke out at that meeting, demanding transparency and the release of the officer's name, which we're still not sure at this point in time whether or not that is going to happen. Right. Now, earlier today, Mayor Bliss posted a new statement on Facebook about the release of the video, saying, "Today is another difficult day in our community." She says, quote, "I know that we will continue to experience a range of strong emotions as we navigate these challenging times. And I recognize that we have difficult days, weeks, and months ahead, both for Patrick's family and our community." The mayor went on to say, "Yet I have great faith in our community that we can navigate these difficult days together and that anger and passion can drive significant and long-term change." And early this afternoon, the city continued to prepare for what we have now learned are several planned marches and free speech activities in response to the release of these police videos. These demonstrations now are expected to take place over the next several days and over the weekend. City Manager Mark Washington released this statement: "I fully support our residents exercising their First Amendment rights. My staff, to include the Office of Special Events and our public safety agencies, is currently coordinating with the organizers to ensure they are able to do so in a safe and productive manner." Now, the city salt trucks were captured lining along both Monroe Center and Louis Street in downtown Grand Rapids by 1390 Side's Justin Bachman. Washington says this is just a precautionary measure to provide public safety should it be needed. Justin also captured this tarp covering a window of a business on Monroe Center bearing Patrick Lyoya's name. And one of the other things that that Justin told me while he was down there is that he talked to several business owners. They weren't willing to go on camera, but he had some conversations with them, and they said some of them did not want to put up boards on their windows. They didn't want to send the wrong message. They didn't want to say that they were in fear. They wanted to show support. And so that is kind of the tone of what we're feeling from downtown. And because we really do not know what we're going to see yet, we're waiting for that in just a few minutes. But the Lyoya family did reach out to a national attorney, Ben Crump, who has represented, among others, the families of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. Now, hundreds watched and listened at the Renaissance Church over the weekend as County Commissioner Robert Womack and attorney Ben Crump continued to call for justice. Lyoyas have officially hired him to represent them in the long, long process that lies ahead.
It was a traffic stop. You should not be sentenced to death over a traffic stop. So I think about Patrick and the possibility of what he was to become. As I often think about Trayvon's possibility, I think about Breonna's possibility. I think about Ahmaud Arbery's possibility. And that's why this is so heartbreaking to us. A young black man was killed a couple hours away from here, and they showed him doing something wrong, and they released that video immediately. But when the shoe is on the other foot and it shows the police doing something wrong, they try to delay, and sweep it under the rug.
All right, now we are ready to go live to City Hall now, where we are about to hear what has happened in the last few days. And here's Grand Rapids City Manager Mark Washington.
Added to the list of cities across the country where another African-American man has died as a result of the use of lethal force with the interaction of law enforcement. I offer my sincere condolences to the family of Patrick Lyoya, who is grieving the death of a son, a father, and brother. And this is also a very difficult time for the members of our police department and the officers specifically as they process this very regrettable event in which a life has to be taken in enforcement of the law. When I saw the video, it was painful to watch, and I immediately asked, what caused this to happen? And what more could have been done to prevent this from occurring? I continue to ask those questions and will be looking for those answers as a result from the investigative process, as well as future improvements to policy and practice. As a nationally recognized expert on the use of force, we are fortunate to have Chief Winstrom, who is both a certified law enforcement officer as well as an attorney. And he is well positioned to help us find answers, identify accountability, and propose improvements. As city manager, the public has my commitment to get through this together. But there will be understandably expressions of shock, of anger, and of pain. We acknowledge that this is a necessary process, but the city has the courage to embrace the tough questions and answer those questions, and are committed to operating with full transparency and accountability to make sure that justice prevails. Again, I want to thank Police Chief Winstrom for his commitment to transparency and agreeing to release the video which you will see today, despite requests for waiting to do so. I also want to thank our community partners and advocates for providing the necessary support during this difficult time while still holding us accountable to make sure that its police department and its government not only does the right things in terms of process, but also does the right thing in terms of decisions. We are determined to get this right. Several years ago, reflecting our commitment to accountability, our city commission adopted a policy requiring a third-party investigation of all officer-involved shootings. And this is to be led by the Michigan State Police. The city immediately utilized that policy following the unfortunate incident on April the 4th. As of today, that investigation is still ongoing, and we have not heard the determination from the prosecutor, we have not heard the determination from the Michigan State Police or a determination from the prosecutor, but the chief will operate in full transparency to let the public know what he knows of what happened at that time. I urge the state police to prioritize and continue their investigation in an urgent manner. This family, the officer, and our community deserves answers. Our Oversight Office will continue to monitor and investigate the actions, and our city attorney has actively been involved. And at this time, I would like to present our Director of Oversight and Public Accountability, who monitors the actions of the police department, Mr. Brandon Davis.
Thank you, City Manager, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brandon Davis. I serve as the Director of Oversight and Public Accountability here in the City of Grand Rapids. This is an exceptionally tough time for our community. I want to start by sharing my sincerest thoughts and prayers with the family of Patrick Lyoya, with our community, and all those who have been impacted by this incident. The loss of life is always tragic, and given the history of our country, when a life, particularly the life of a Black man, is lost during an interaction with law enforcement, there's a great deal of emotion, frustration, and anger. As an oversight professional, it is important that I review, monitor, and audit all investigations impartially based on law and policy, and I will do that. However, that does not remove my humanity or empathy, and as such, I grieve with our community. Throughout this process, I have been extremely grateful for the collaboration and openness that the Chief and GRPD have shown to the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. In this instance, the Chief made sure to notify me of the events of April 4th and welcomed me to the scene in order to ensure that there was independent oversight monitoring the activity that was taking place. Additionally, the chief ensured that OPA had access to the videos of this incident. It is without hesitation that I say, since his arrival, Chief Winstrom and GRPD have been more collaborative with the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability than any other time in OPA's history. With that being said, while monitoring this first phase of the investigation, I've noted items for us to consider to ensure that we do the best job possible of ensuring accountability and transparency as we move forward. After this investigation is concluded, we'll do a post-incident review of the city's actions and consider concerns like how much time it took to release the video of this incident, or questions like when should an officer's name be released in connection with an investigation. We have to ask how much time it took to render aid, or what policy changes, if any, can be implemented to help prevent this type of result. We also have to ask questions like when should officers use disengagement as a form of de-escalation. I'm committed to thoroughly reviewing these matters post-investigation and any other questions or concerns that might arise throughout the course of the investigation. However, right now, the most important thing for my office to do is to monitor this investigation to ensure that there is truth and accountability. There are several agencies that will be involved throughout the course of this investigation. I want to take a moment to help clarify the roles of different agencies throughout the process. The Michigan State Police are responsible for the criminal investigation in this case. Pursuant to city policy, whenever there is an officer involved shooting, we refer that investigation to the Michigan State Police. Once the Michigan State Police complete their investigation, they will forward that investigation, if they choose to the Kent County Prosecutor's Office for the review for criminal charges. It is the prosecutor's office that has the ability to make a decision regarding criminal charges. The city of Grand Rapids does not have any authority or discretion in that space. The MSP will also forward that investigation to the Grand Rapids Police Department for review by the Internal Affairs Division, and there will be an Internal Affairs investigation. That investigation will be monitored by the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. We will audit that investigation. We will seek transparency. We will seek truth. Justice requires that this matter be handled fairly and efficiently. The Lyoya family and all the parties involved deserve a fair and transparent investigation. As the director of OPA, I will do everything in my power to make sure that that happens. At this point, I'll turn it over to the chief.
This is a difficult day. My heart goes out to the family of Patrick Lyoya. I want to thank the city for the patience it's shown during this process, and I especially want to thank the Congolese community of West Michigan, who even in their grief and anger have shown me nothing but love and respect. I also want to thank the men and women of the Grand Rapids Police Department who continue to sacrifice and come to work each day during this, what is the most difficult times. I'm going to play the video, which is about 20 minutes. I will be pausing it twice before, in two different segments before the fatal gunshot is fired.
So we have chosen not to show this live because this is the first time we are all seeing this. So we want to wait to make sure what we are about to see and what we can describe to you.
Correct. There were some interesting things that they talked about already, wanting to make sure that going forward they review policy and the way that certain things are handled. And I know we have our expert with us now.
Yes, we have Kirsten Holtz, who is a defense attorney, and we are just wanting your insight. I know that you haven't seen it either. None of us has seen the video, but just even what you have heard so far in the beginning of this news conference, what is your reaction?
There have been different perspectives on how this interaction started, whether or not it was a traffic stop or whether or not it was simply an officer coming upon Mr. Lyoya having car trouble. I have heard that a struggle ensued to some degree, and that at some point in the video, the officer withdrew his firearm after initially trying to deploy a taser and ultimately shooting Mr. Lyoya in the head. It's an absolute tragedy. And I think what happens in the next few days is really going to depend on the quality and the content of this videos.
Right. And as we just heard, this is all going to be now handed over once they get all of their evidence gathered to the Kent County prosecutor, who will determine if there are charges filed against the police officer.
Exactly. I don't envy the prosecutor's job that they have to do in this case. It's very difficult because what a prosecutor and what a prosecutor's office can prove sometimes is different than what we as citizens would like to see happen. And that's one of the challenges of being a part of the criminal justice system and seeing it firsthand.
Of course, we want to quantify the fact that, you have, as a public defender with Levine and Levine, been on the side where you have defended, where people have had the excessive force by police and you've had to come to their defense. And so therefore, you have a little bit of expertise in all of this that we are seeing. And some of the policies and the procedures you also reviewed from the Grand Rapids Police Department as well. And so that, I think, gave us a really good insight. A lot of people were upset about the fact that it took so long for these videos to be released. It took so long for, the police officer to talk, which we still haven't heard from. So when you took a deep dive into that, what did you find?
I found that the Grand Rapids Police Department has definitely increased its accountability and its openness. It has become much more transparent over the past couple of years, specifically the last few months, actually. The policies with regard to use of force and officer involved shootings and body cams are posted online for everybody to see. With regard to use of force, it's ultimately up to the chief when there's deadly force involved, whether or not those videos are released, whether or not the use of force reports are actually provided and disseminated to the public.
So let's give this some context, because Chief Eric Winstrom was sworn in as Grand Rapids Police Chief on March 7th. That day that this happened, he happened to be doing a ride-along with an officer when he got the call. So he was on the scene, and we have seen video from neighbors who took phone video. He was on the scene of this. So, and we already heard that since he's been the chief, ththings have already improved, the relations. So that's an interesting comment to hear.
Yes, and in such a short period of time, too. And the fact that also, Brenda Davis has such confidence in the fact that, he's been more transparent as a chief than other chiefs. And so that's great, going forward, looking at some of those policies, that 72-hour policy, what takes so long for them to get this information out? Do you think there was a strategy behind why the chief waited this long?
I think potentially. I mean, it's all speculation at the end of the day, but this is an absolute tragedy. And anytime you have a white police officer involved in the shooting of a black man, the community will feel righteous outrage. And the reality is that these policies that are in place are designed to hopefully increase accountability and increase trust in the process.
Yeah, I want to tell our viewers right now what we are seeing, because they are showing the video that we have chosen not to show yet until we've seen it. But we are seeing the actual police video, an officer pulling a vehicle over, a gentleman getting out of the car, and right now what we're seeing is they are just conversing. So we are keeping an eye on the video as we are continuing our live coverage, and we are not going to show it until we have seen it and know what we are going to show you. But still, right now, it's just, it looks like a traffic stop. The car was pulled over. Sure. The police officer walked up to the car, and now they are still conversing. Mm-hmm. So that's what we are seeing right now in front of the house, in front of where the shooting occurred.
Right. There really is just it looks like a conversation. Nothing has escalated at this time. And he's really just sort of talking, to him about why he's pulling him over and so forth.
It's another they're walking in.
Mm-hmm.
And the police chief did say that there was a struggle that ensued for between 90 seconds and 2 minutes. And so that's what we're seeing a little of right now. They're in front of the car. But earlier we were seeing the video because there have been peaceful protests and rallies and, calling for accountability and transparency. Now we're seeing some more of the video into a yard. But, everyone has, even the chief said he's been seeing nothing but respect from the Congolese community.
Okay, and now we see him running. We do see Patrick fleeing, and they're running down the sidewalk. He gets him in the driveway of another home, where it looks as though he's trying to. And is there someone?
Still a struggle.
Still
it
a
looks.
struggle. I see the passenger car door opening. I don't know if there's another person in
They
there.
say there was a
it's-
passenger in the vehicle as well, but we haven't received much information. Right now, they're walking through a yard, still the two of them, and you can see there is a struggle. They're holding on to each other. We just lost them out of the video, but
And so, Kirsten, from your perspective of looking at this, would you say this was excessive force at the moment?
At the moment, I've watched hundreds of these type of videos, and we look for very, very specific things as defense attorneys. One of the first things I noticed was the officer putting his hands on Mr. Lyoya's arm. That, it's hard to tell, frankly, without hearing the audio and the commands that the officer was giving to Mr. Lyoya. You have the right to resist an unlawful arrest. Whether or not this arrest that he was perhaps going to undertake was lawful or unlawful remains to be seen. You really do need the audio.
yeah. And this is the very first clip, and this is from the dash cam of the police car. So
Correct.
that's all we have seen so far. So right now, the police officer and Patrick Lyoya are out of the frame of video. So we do not know what's happening. We do see that a passenger did get out of the vehicle and is just standing there. So that is the very first clip. We expect, I believe 9 clips are what they're going to show us.
Yes, so this is the initial part.
Fairly standard.
Yeah.
Yeah, fairly standard. This is what we typically see in cases that involve an altercation between an officer and a subject. I think the body cam video will be particularly telling.
And the one of the issues with the body cam is that it fell off at some point during the struggle, but it continued to run. So, okay, we're going to show some of what's happening. We have
we're going back to the press
Chief
conference
Winstrom right now.
for a very, very wide shot of the video. This is what we've been looking at. You can see the passenger off to the side. This is where they're disguising the identities of any innocent people who were involved in this.
And we have chosen not to turn up the audio, so that's why you cannot hear the chief, because we don't want to air anything that is going to be difficult or inappropriate. So what he has done is he set up the first video, and so while this is ending, I'm sure that he's going now to, he's speaking now that he's going to probably set up the next video. It's just, as you can see, a wide shot. You can see the car. We're going to listen to what the chief's saying.
1610, Roger, subject, the access city weapons at 120 feet.
All right, so now we are hearing some of the traffic there from the police radio. So we're coming back here to talk a little bit more about this. And Kirsten, you were mentioning just about the increase in gun incidents involving police officers versus civilians. Will you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I did a bit of research, and from the beginning of 2021 through last week, there were 78 officers shot and killed in the line of duty. For that exact same time period, beginning of 2021 through yesterday, there were 1,009 people, citizens, killed and shot by law enforcement officers. So it really is an epidemic. It's a problem. And this just happens to be a really good example of what people are encountering when they have law enforcement encounters, and also what law enforcement is encountering. This appears to be the beginning of the body-worn camera.
Yes, now we're seeing it. Of course, we can't hear it either, but it looks as if Patrick Lyoya is saying, what did I do? Why? He's still standing there. They're talking. Why do you think the numbers have increased so much, these numbers you just told us?
There are a lot of different theories with regard to why that is. I have heard from some law enforcement sources that the climate to be a law enforcement officer has declined. not as many people want to be law enforcement officers these days because they know that they are subject to perhaps greater negativity than they once were. Trust has eroded to a degree in law enforcement. So I think, I'm sorry.
Yep,
Yeah.
we just did see the altercation now between the officer and Patrick. It looks as though he loses his radio. They're on the ground. There was a little bit of a hands to the face.
Yes, you can see
and
that.
so now you are seeing this, Kirsten. What
Yes.
are your thoughts?
Again, it's difficult. Oh, it looks like we've paused.
Yeah, or that camera, that body, the
And
body
maybe
cam may have
perhaps that's when it fell
gotten
off.
covered. Mhm.
Yes. The way these interactions start and continue is important. Whether or not, and I can't tell from this, whether or not a subject is reaching for the officer's weapon is a key issue. Whether or not they themselves are engaging in, if they have a weapon on them, whether they're trying to get the officer's taser, those are typical situations I have personally seen in body cam videos. It does appear, though, that the body cam is still attached at this point.
Yes.
And while you were speaking, Kirsten, about the increase in the gun shootings, I was watching the video and I could see Patrick mouth, why are you doing this? Now there's the taser, and Patrick is grabbing the taser from the police officer.
Yes.
He has his
You
hand
can
on
see
it.
the struggle. And we were not told, of the information that was released to the media and the public, we were not told if Patrick Lyoya was armed, if they thought he might be. So we're learning this today as well. So far we haven't seen any. This is the officer's body worn cam, then it was deactivated at this point.
okay.
So that's where.
I think the key thing that I did see was just looking at Patrick, asking the officer, why? What did I do? Why? And again, without the audio, it's a little hard to know what's exactly happening. But at least we're getting a little bit clearer picture of what did happen on that day.
And what we are seeing now, this is another clip that they're playing now, and this looks like it's from the Ring cam, the doorbell camera from a neighbor's house. And we also know that a neighbor took cell phone video after the shooting. So this looks like right after the. Okay, we're going to go to hear what the chief has to say. Okay, so we're going to stay on this as this video is playing. As you can see, it's the Ring doorbell cam that we're seeing right now. You see the police car.
You can see them running through the yard there.
You're hearing stop. So, Kirsten, now you can hear what the officer is saying.
Yes, it appears that he's giving lawful commands to Mr. Lyoya, but again, the key is, at some point, deadly force was used. And in order to use deadly force, the officer needed to have reasonably believed that his life or the life of someone else was in imminent danger or great bodily harm, a risk of great bodily harm. So, it does look like he's pausing it at this point. I don't want to talk over, but.
So once again, if you are just joining us, we are watching this live news conference being held by the Grand Rapids new chief of police, Eric Winstrom, who has been on the job for about 5 weeks, and he happened to be on the ride along on April 4th, the day that this officer shot and killed Patrick Lyoya, and that's what we are looking at right now. We are choosing not to show the video or play the audio because we are just seeing this for the first time as well. So we want to make sure that it is appropriate to air, and we can explain it to you as it does air.
And of course, Chief Winstrom certainly has a tough job ahead. trying to mend, the community and build trust again in the police force. We were just getting over that after we had all of the rioting in May of 2020. We changed leadership. We did hear that Brandon Davis, who is in charge of the oversight and accountability with the city, say how much he was happy to see the collaboration again. And now we have this case. And so in your experience, Kristen, do you see a point where communities can come back together, or do you think something like this is just a divide?
That's so difficult to answer. I think, it appears that Chief Winstrom is doing a really good job changing things that were broken, fixing things that were broken within the department. But it takes time. You don't just change the cultural attitudes and about law enforcement, policing, racism with regard to law enforcement and policing. And so I think it's really going to take time. I certainly think that all the steps Grand Rapids has taken to improve transparency and accountability have been wonderful. But it remains to be seen what other types of changes Chief Winstrom can put into place so that things like this don't happen again.
So just for our viewers, this is Kirsten Holtz with Levine & Levine, and she's a defense attorney, and she is giving us her expertise and her insight as we watch this video. And the video the chief just played, you could hear the gunshot. So that's what is playing right now.
Yeah.
They are now moving to a new clip of video.
Mm-hmm.
And the chief sets up each clip of video before it is played. So now this looks like this is the cell phone.
Yes, and right now Patrick is struggling. They're up, they're walking through the grass, they're together, intertwined. The officer is definitely trying to
gain control.
Gain control of him, yes.
They're both standing upright and kind of almost like, in a dance, moving around, and now the officer is trying to, looks like, bring him down. The video has gone out of frame.
Yes. And Kirsten, you have 10 years of representing people who have been in a situation like Patrick's, and so you have this other perspective that many of us don't have when it comes to really trying to figure out excessive force, when it was used and when it should be prosecuted.
Yeah, it is so fact specific. It depends on how close together people might be, the relative heights and weights and strengths and ages of each person that's involved in a situation like this.
Now that's interesting to me, because I would have never thought ages, heights, strengths, all of that would take into account.
And it put it in perspective. Patrick Lyoya was 26 years old. The only thing we know about the Grand Rapids police officer is he was a white man who has been on the force since 2015. Correct. So that's all we know. But we can see the size of the two of them as they struggle.
And why is that something that gets taken into consideration?
Well, that's a very complicated answer. Self-defense. Ultimately, the law on self-defense in Michigan, it shouldn't matter. Yeah. It's an objective standard, which means that jurors, if this was to be prosecuted and if this was to go to trial, jurors would be instructed that they need to assess whether this officer reasonably believed, as an objective person, that his life was in danger before he fired his gun.
And what we're seeing now is just still the cell phone video is pointed toward the sidewalk on the ground. So we are not seeing anymore. We're seeing the struggle again.
It did appear that the officer just withdrew his firearm in that clip. However, any good defense attorney will absolutely bring up this officer's training and what was actually going on in this prolonged struggle, despite the fact that the law says it's an objective standard.
And we do have a little inside information from one of our reporters that's there, saying that the officer was telling, in the clip, the officer was telling him to stop multiple times while they were struggling, and that struggling that we saw where they were standing up in the yard, and then he said, stop resisting. Is that an important keynote?
No, it's not. Because at the end of the day, this resulted in a man's death. In any other type of case, specifically like a fleeing and attempting to elude or resisting and obstructing, that fact would be important. However, when a gun is pulled out and someone is shot, officers can't shoot subjects for resisting.
We're going to interrupt you because now City Manager Mark Washington is back up speaking again. Can we bring him up?
Regrettable, very sad day in our community, and we have heard several expressions of a range of emotions, and we will get through this. It will be hurtful, but it will help us to get to the bottom of all the questions that were highlighted earlier. I want to thank our city commissioners also for their support. Several of them are here today, and the mayor is here with us. I also want to, again, express my condolences to the family, and I also acknowledge the voices we have been hearing calling for this, along with more answers to questions and accountability. And all of them have been peaceful. All the demonstrations and protests have been peaceful. I want to thank those community partners who have been helping to organize those protests in a peaceful manner. I see Commissioner Womack here today. Thank you for that, along with the community pastors and who have been helping the family, as well as their outside counsel, Attorney Crump, who spoke to our community and expressed the desires to get down to get answers as well as justice, but do it in a way that is respectful of honors Patrick's life and as his family has wished. So at this time, I'm going to have the chief come and answer any questions about the actual incident.
No, so I've got, so the question is, am I planning on naming the officer? And usually over the past few days, that question has been framed, and if this was anybody but a police officer, you would have said the name. And I'm going to treat the officer like I would anybody else. We don't name suspects. If the officer is charged with a crime, we will name him at that time. But the short answer is no, I'm not going to be naming the officer.
How do you expect people to have trust in this process then if they don't know who this officer is?
Sure. And I'll tell you, so the process is this. We have an outside agency looking into this incident. It's the Michigan State Police. Generally speaking, when they complete their investigation is traditionally when videos like this would be released. We felt that on balance, it was more important to be transparent with the community, to provide what information the Grand Rapids Police Department has immediately before that process is finished. So that might be a better question for the Michigan State Police to say when their investigation will be complete, to provide the answers that I can't give.
Are the actions taken by this officer in accordance with Grand Rapids Police use of force policy?
That's a great question, and one that we will definitely come to an answer with. However, I'm not running the investigation. This is the video of the information that I have, but there is an entire investigation being conducted by the Michigan State Police, which I do not have access to by design for conflict of interest. I will not make a policy decision, nor will I come to a conclusion of criminal law at this time. As soon as that investigation is completed and handed over to my agency, we will come to those conclusions. Go ahead. Sure, that's a great question. The body-worn camera, as you can tell from the video, is deactivated. We actually own that body-worn camera because it was on a Grand Rapids Police Department officer, and that technology is such that it's a record, not only every time it turns on and off, but every time the button is tapped. So to turn a body-worn camera off once it's activated, the officer has to hold the button steady for 3 seconds. What we've seen in examining the information on that is that it was hit many times during that struggle. That was the first moment that it was held down for more than 3 seconds. That's what deactivated it. That's a great question, sir. So the question is the prosecutor's office here. How the process works is the Michigan State Police will conclude their investigation and either work with right now, they may be working with Chris Becker's office right now, or complete the investigation and hand it off to the prosecutor for review. And the reason that I'm not asking the prosecutor to come stand with me today or the Michigan State Police is for that division to prohibit the conflict of interest. to make sure that there really is that wall between us to protect the integrity of the investigation. So that's why they're not. So I haven't talked to Chris Becker about the details of this investigation.
Chief,
When he's made his decision.
Chief,
Typically, the answer is that you're trying to place him in custody. That's it. You're trying to secure that individual. The follow-up question, I'm sure, will be, was the use of force in policy, and I'm not going to comment on that, but the test is going to be whether in the view of a reasonable police officer, whether that deadly force was needed to prevent death or great bodily harm to that officer. That's the test which will be used for the policy.
is an officer follow up on that?
So that's a complicated question. It depends on where you go. But the short answer is it can be. So a taser is not per se a deadly weapon. The taser is what would be known as an intermediate weapon. Intermediate weapon would have the potential to cause death. It would have the potential to cause great bodily harm, but not necessarily. And that's depending on all the facts of the case. Well, I can answer the second part easier, and that is because if you listen closely to the body-worn camera transmission, when he calls that there's an individual running, that triggers the call for backup. The first part of your question was
Why he made the stop by himself?
why he make a stop. I don't know the answer to that question at this time.
Chief, you mentioned
Did the officer turn it? So no, but from the context that I can tell, it appears that the body-worn camera is turned off because of the pressure from the other individual or some other object on his body. But that's again, that will come out once the investigation is complete.
Did they say that they didn't press it?
Did the officer say, okay, so I'm not going to get into the officer's statements at this time until the completion of the investigation. I'm sorry.
Chief, you say how long you're
I believe 7 years.
on. Why didn't you just let him go?
I don't have the answer to that question.
And Chief, the stop was
That'll all come out with the investigation. So just to be clear again, the reason that we're having this today is this is transparency about the use of force incident. Want to be as transparent as possible. There's a lot of factors. There's what happened before, how the stop, how did why the foot pursuit. There's what happens after, when CPR was started. I've been asking about that. How long did the body stay on scene? So there's a range of questions. I don't have all those answers because this is not a Grand Rapids Police Department investigation. What I wanted to do today was provide to you the basic information that I have in the spirit of transparency on the use of force incident itself. But good questions. Not necessarily. That would be a case-by-case basis as to whether or not, in the officer's judgment, it determined that this would be a situation where they needed backup or not. Mismatched plate is not a felony. I don't have the exact dates. I have not reviewed his training record. No. Yes. That's right. So we did that to provide the homeowner a little bit more privacy. No, it does not. Actually, the shooting can be viewed in that scene. We don't blur any portion of the shooting. It's just because of the distance that, it's not suitable for close examination, but the entire video is there. So your comparison, it's close, but there's and I'll tell you the differences. So when an officer's in a traffic pursuit, essentially you're chasing a 2,000-pound projectile, which is inherently dangerous, which is why traffic pursuit policies exist in most agencies across the country, including ours, which restrict pursuits for things like forcible felonies, things like that. When it gets to foot pursuit policies, most law enforcement looks at that from a training standard. So it's not, you can't contemplate every scenario in a foot pursuit to put it into a well-crafted policy. So foot pursuits, things like that, when to de-escalate, that's something that we train heavily on.
But that's set off.
Consistency with the officer's training. Right. That's a policy conclusion. I'm not going to come to a conclusion until I know all the facts of the case. I appreciate the question, though.
One more question.
Again, so you're asking me to draw a conclusion on this, on the incident. That would be a legal conclusion that I'm not prepared to draw today.
You as chief,
Thank you. I view it as a tragedy. Well, my initial reaction, I had been on scene. I had seen the videos that we had possession of, which was the in-car camera and the body-worn camera, and then I saw the video surveillance, and it was just a progression of sadness for me. So the loss of life in any circumstance is sad, and when I know that it's going to impact our city like this, it was more sadness. Me being so new here, it was sad. That's a good question, and I am unable to draw a conclusion at the time because of this. That would potentially violate the officer's rights, and until I have the investigation, I can't make that determination. Can you ask that again, sir? I didn't hear.
Can you talk about the officer? The reason why?
Well, right. So officers, I went through the use of force standard with you for deadly force, but again, we would expect an officer only to pull their weapon when they anticipate the need to legally use the weapon.
Covered on scene?
The only weapons that I know were on scene were the officer's firearm and taser. However, I do not have all the information on the investigation. That's a great question, something that we're definitely going to look into. So I appreciate the question, but I'm also the chief of the Grand Rapids Police Department, and I have certain rules to follow as far as disciplinary proceedings, and the police officers need to know that I'm going to follow them, and they're going to be held to high standards, which I've already let them know. I'm going to hold them to high standards, but I'm going to do it the right way. I can't say at that time. Yeah.
What police station was that, Grand Rapids?
East Grand Rapids, I believe, was the first officers on scene.
What can you talk?
When
did they get there?
I believe the first officers on scene came about 3 minutes after the initial call for backup, and it's something to look for, but there's a lot of factors there. There's the weather, there's the icy conditions, so that will all be part of the investigation as well. Well, funny you should say that, because I had the body-worn camera video. on the first day. I had the in-car camera video on the first day. And because of a connection with one of my officers and a resident there, we had the surveillance camera on the first day. But as you can see from watching the videos, that didn't tell the whole story. However, I also knew that there was another video out there, the cell phone camera video. So I talked to the state police and I said I wanted to release the videos as soon as possible. However, being appraised that there was a fourth video out there, which as you can see, told a much clearer story of what it was, I wanted to release all 4 videos at the same time, because there was the potential if I released those 3 videos and then the 4th one was released in a month, that I'd be accused of being less transparent, even though I did not have that video. So I worked with the Michigan State Police to get that video as quickly as I could a few days later, and then I worked with the prosecutor to make sure that we could reach a point where my release of all of these videos wouldn't interfere negatively on the criminal investigation that he's undertaking. I appreciate you being here, sir. I know it's a ticketable offense, and, you know, I'm brand new here. I haven't even taken my licensing test yet. So I don't know. I'll tell you in the... From my view of the video, the taser was deployed twice. The taser did not make contact, and Mr. Lyoya was shot in the head. However, that's the only information that I have. I don't have any of the autopsy, the ME's report, or anything else. Correct. Correct. No. Yeah, the taser deployed twice, both times into the ground. You would hear 2 shots in 2 different points in the presentation, yes, sir. Chief, the city. So the 9 videos, to make sense of that, there's an additional body-worn camera video because the officer's video, which was found in the mud, actually triggered back on. So how the body-worn cameras work is certain triggering events automatically turn them on, including activation or deactivation of a taser, the turning on of a squad car lights nearby. So at some point in time after the fact, that body-worn camera video was turned back on. So you'll be able to access that video. It doesn't show the shooting incident. The reason it sounds like there's so many is because the home surveillance video was cut up into 4 separate videos. And so that leaves the other videos, which you can see the source video, which we provided the information to receive that. Yes. The city manager said that. I support free speech 100%. Let your voice be heard. We love peaceful protests. The officer is on paid leave, stripped of his police powers, pending the outcome of this investigation. I believe the officer was a daytime officer, so a couple hours into his shift. Me being from Chicago for the last 20 years, I've handled many police shootings myself, so I do have a lot of experience in this. I was hoping to never have to utilize that experience here. I did not reach out to any other departments as far as the presentation goes. I did talk to the chief of Ann Arbor. I talked to the chief of Battle Creek. Just they wanted to express, their thoughts with me and just for discussions. But unfortunately, this is something that we had quite a bit of in Chicago, and I hope this is the last one I ever have to deal with.
How do you think people here?
I don't know. I'm sure, like me, they'll be very sad. This is a tragic event. Yeah, and I hope that they show love to the Lyoya family. From my view of the video, it looks like they each had a hand on the taser for about 90 seconds. So they were struggling over the taser, from my view of the video. So this is not a conclusion because I don't know what other information is out there, but it looks like that they were struggling over the taser for about 90 seconds.
How long did that
You know what? I don't have that. I haven't timed it out like that. I'm sorry. That's true. Well, I know Ben Crump is in town. He's a sort of well-known civil litigation attorney, and I'm sure that he was anxious to see the video, and he'll make his decision accordingly. No, I wouldn't be surprised. No. Well, keep in mind that Grand Rapids Police Department is the second largest municipal police department in the state of Michigan. We have a lot of officers, so a lot of times we do ride two-man. Following this incident, we implemented at least a temporary policy where all of our cars are two-man while we reevaluate our internal policies. However, there's many police departments in the country who only have one car on the road with one individual in it. So it's very common to have a single person car, and it just depends on what works best for the municipality.
So like at the
Not necessarily unusual at all, right?
was that
That's a good question. I don't know as far as the schedule goes whether that made an impact or not.
You said that you
Sure. I think there's already been talk about having a lot of public discussions about this, about what Grand Rapids Police Department can do better. Well, Mr. Thompson, thank you for being here and asking that question. And I'm an at-will employee, so I'll work here until they tell me to leave. Well, morale's probably what you think it would be. It's everybody knows it's going to be a tough time. We're trying to rally together because I'm going to need the police officers over the coming days, over the coming weeks. I mean, through the summer, we need the Grand Rapids Police Department here. We need it because they're a vital portion of providing public safety. So do my best to keep morale up, and but we know it's going to be tough times ahead. We'll get through it.
Let's go with 3 more.
Not as far as I know. Well, I'll tell you the bad is that it's an absolute tragedy. It's heartbreaking. It's been a difficult time internally for the police department, but the good is it's prompted a lot of discussions and a lot of connections, which I plan to make down the road as I stayed here longer, but it's forced the issue even early. So I like to think that there is some positive. I can answer that. I did speak to the officer on scene, and I also called him that night to talk to him, yes. I don't know how to characterize other than, when you're in a traumatic event like that, you would respond how you would think you would respond, somebody pretty much in shock. Yeah. That would kind of cause me to draw a conclusion as to the incident, which I'm not willing to do until the investigation is over. But, I'm very reform-minded, and I'm sure that I'm going to find ways that the Grand Rapids Police Department can do things better, and I'm interested in getting us there. It was not, no. Well, I can't confirm whether it was in the process of breaking down or what the status was, but I know that it was a traffic stop.
So there you have it, Police Chief Eric Winstrom answering questions from the media about the shooting. One of the main things that people were waiting to see is if he was going to release the name of the officer. Kirsten Holt's attorney, are you surprised that he is not?
No, I'm not. I to some degree, I appreciate it. The name of a suspect or a subject of an investigation not being released until and if they decide that charges will be filed seems appropriate to me.
And just so I can tell the viewers what his answer was when he was asked if he was going to release the name, he said, "We don't name suspects. We won't be naming the officer. We're showing this video to be transparent. We will await the investigation from the Michigan State Police, who are conducting the investigation into the shooting."
And we did see some of the body cam video, and you have 10 years of experience of defending people who have been a victim of excessive force by police. And so what was your experience in viewing that body cam video?
Up until the point that Mr. Lyoya was killed, it seemed fairly standard, frankly. The jarring nature of a body cam video was there. Many times it's difficult to determine what's being said by virtue of clothes rubbing up against the microphone that's on the body cam. But it really looked fairly typical. It looked like a traffic stop gone wrong, and a struggle between a subject and an officer. And I've seen videos like this before, but this one turned. Right. This one went.
And the thing in this video that we did actually see the taser. We heard about the taser and some of the reports, but we saw it. And he said it was deployed twice into the ground.
Yeah. Yes, and there was a struggle. There was a little bit of a struggle.
Absolutely.
And you, as in watching it, you say sometimes there's a point where maybe the officer has to make a different decision as to continuing to pursue arrest.
De-escalating.
Right. I mean, there are, and they're outlined in the use of force policies that the Grand Rapids Police Department has set forth. But there comes a point where officers have the option of disengaging, trying a different tactic, pulling back and just taking down information and trying to pursue it in a different way. He was a solo officer, which complicates things. If there had been another officer there, this would probably have been a very different situation, perhaps. But Yeah, it's a tragedy.
Well, and as we heard the chief say that up until now, they would have a single officer in a single car, but now they do have 2 officers per car as a result of this, and
Right.
while they evaluate the policies.
Changes that Chief Winstrom's making, already, and I just think that one of the other most important things that you talked about, because you did sort of take a deeper dive into the policies of the Grand Rapids Police Department, and we talk about training, and you talk about optional training, and de-escalation is an optional training, and so is dealing with, foreign nationals, which is what we know Patrick was.
Right, yeah. The Grand Rapids Police Department, in an effort to be more transparent, has posted metrics on training and external complaints and internal complaints on officers. When I looked at it, it looked like it had stopped tabulating data in 2021. Likely as a result partly of the COVID pandemic.
Sure.
But I was able to view some of the policies, and many of the policies that were optional were somewhat surprising to me. How to have really positive encounters with people on the street, and again, one of them was how to have encounters with foreign nationals or suspected foreign nationals, and the cultural differences that are inherent in those interactions.
And that being an optional training for officers,
Correct.
not a mandatory training.
Correct.
Might be something that changes in the future.
It certainly might be.
And that was when the chief was asked if anything good could come of this. He said, well, there's been a lot of good discussion as a result of this, and he hoped that it wouldn't be forced like this, that it would be something the community would be doing, but this is now having a forced discussion of the community.
Well, Kristen, we've enjoyed talking with you this afternoon, getting your perspective.
It's been
We're
my
not
pleasure.
not done yet, though.
Yes, no, we're not. Kirsten's going to stay with us throughout the newscast from 5 to 6:30. And just to sum things up, we saw 4 videos, 9 different clips of what happened from different elements of cameras. Also, the officer, his name is not going to be released because the investigation is ongoing. He is on paid leave, stripped of his powers, pending the investigation by the Michigan State Police, who will then turn it over to County Prosecutor Chris Becker.
That's correct. So stay with us on 13 on your side, on air and online for the very latest on this case. We will bring you more information tonight, starting at 5.
I'll see you then.